Hey guys, welcome to the cave. It's been over a year since I've done one of these, and really the reason I haven't done one in quite so long is really what hasn't been said. You know, I spend a lot of time talking to everyone and posting on the forums, and I always assume everyone kind of knows everything. And but I figured, you know, there's a lot of new people in the groups, and why not kind of just take a little snapshot of where I am and stuff like that. So, and I'm going to take an opportunity to answer some of the questions that people have had that maybe have missed some of this stuff along the way. So I get a lot of questions about the camera and stuff, and you know, there's a lot of negativity around the camera and stuff, and a lot of people have a lot of feelings about them, and it's a little confusing of the whole situation, and I don't really want to dive too deep into it. Basically, at some point, Mark was making amps, and then there was a business arrangement in which Brad King and the whole Friedman crew over at Rig Talk were basically going to make Cameron branded amps, and that they did make a bunch of amps, and then it ended for whatever reason. So there's, you know, a limited amount of amps that Mark actually made, and there's a limited amount of amps that came from that partnership. I have everything from all the, I guess, eras, so I'll kind of take you through that. I'll start there. So this is my Cameron CCV. This amp, this is my favorite amp. Everyone always asks me what my favorite amp is, so I'll just answer that right now. So it's my favorite amp because it does my thing the best, right? There's plenty of people who come over and they try all my amps, and they don't feel the same way, and that's fine. And that's the whole point, right? There isn't one holy grail, right? This is a personal connection with a tone and a feel, and you know, not everything is the same for everyone. So no one should ever make you feel like, you know, they have something and it's the best, because it's impossible for that to be true. But I love this amp. It really combines, you know, some of the best characteristics of all the amps I've played in one thing. And what's remarkable about the amp is that it's almost like a mod machine. It pretty much, you can kind of tweak the entire amp. Like every single knob has a three-way toggle up top, and the clean can go from crystal clean to almost AC/DC-ish. So basically it's two channels, but you can set them in such a variety of ways. So you can have a pristine clean and the best high gain tone ever, and it's just remarkable because so few channel switches do a lot of things well. Most of my amps are one channel. So I love this amp. It's got a three-way clipping on the gain, on the second channel, and then it's got clipping on both gains, and you can mix them and thicken them up or make it more martially. It's kind of really cool. So I love this amp. This is a pre-production CCV. What that means is that it was not made by the Brad King, Friedman, Metropolis crew. Okay, so this actually was made by what we call the Brad King era. This is an Atomica, and I gotta say, you know, this is an awesome amp, regardless of that it's not a real camera, and they really did an awesome job. It's got three-way clipping on the back, so it can be like a clean Marshall and then go super saturated, high gain. It's just a great sounding amp, great feeling amp. Once again, one channel, absolutely awesome. I really hope that they make this amp again, because it's just a fantastic amp. So up here is another CCV. Mark actually made a bunch of these. Maybe he made a handful of these in 2014. And my friend Derek Fuller, who's in Van Halen, they were just on Access TV doing the best of tribute bands. He brought this to my attention. He actually wanted my help selling it. And at first I was like, yeah, I'll help him sell it, because who needs another CCV? And then I was like, wait, I should probably get this thing, right? Because that little thing in the back of my head was, oh, it could be different, you know? You know how we get all crazy, right? So it definitely is different. I think he made some tweaks for Derek to make it sound a little bit more Van Halen-ish in this position. And I think the clean's better on this amp. So they're both awesome. I mean, they're very close in a lot of ways, but they're different enough for me to keep them. And I asked the question, I said, Mark, which is more, you know, if people buy a CCV, is it going to sound like this one, or is it going to sound like this one? And he basically told me that the pre-prod here is what a CCV really sounds like. So, you know, my favorite amp remains my favorite amp, and it is true to the CCV. So I'm going to skip the BE100 for a second. So down here, this is a really interesting amp. So someone took one of the Brad King Atomicas and sent it to Mark, and Mark basically redid it, and it's not really Atomica anymore. It's kind of more of like, to me, I think it's more of an Aldridge, because it's just more, it's thicker, and it's got even more saturation. But it is probably, although the CCV is my favorite amp, this is probably my best sounding amp for what I do. It's kind of like, when it's the highest gain setting, it's kind of like a Mesa Boogie, Coliseum with had a baby with a Marshall. It's just so fantastic sounding, and it's just so articulate. And this upsets me, is that these amps are so awesome, and they're just not they're not available, and I'm hopeful they will be at some point. So down here is the old bitch. So this is, by the way, which is a name that Mark absolutely hates. So he doesn't like the name Old Bitch, and I kind of agree. It's kind of a silly name. But that being said, the mods were based on mods that were done for John Norum, which were later used by Aldridge. So people refer us to Aldridge, but we'll get to the Aldridge later. So this is a very, this is the highest gain amp that I have. It's a little insane. The story is that it was never really done to spec, so there's a lot of things that could be corrected with it. That being said, I still love the amp. What's cool about it is, it's got this gain trim, so you can go like very, very bright Marshall-y thingy, like more like guttural, to like a thicker, more saturated Marshall. So this is just, I love this amp, man. It's one channel and it's furious and completely unusable to most people who gig and don't need that much gain. But that being said, it's, for amp collectors and people who record, it's just such an awesome amp. The one thing I want to mention about the Atomica 08, which is the one that Mark rebuilt, is that it has a 12 position gain switch in the back, as well as the gain trim that the old bitch had. So that's why I say this is more like an Aldridge in that regard. It has the capacity to be a little bit thicker. Okay. So now, so the most famous BD100, this amp is just an interesting amp. I first lent this amp to Joel Hoekstra from Whitesnake, and it was an interesting experience for me. And basically, Joel used this to record his solo album. So please check it out. It's an awesome album. He recorded the album at 2 different locations in New York. 2 different studios, and he actually says that it sounds different depending on which studio he was in, so that's kind of interesting. But if you want to hear a BE100 in a professional studio environment, that's a great album to use as a reference. And Joel signed the back of it, which is very cool of him. And Joel also hooked me up with Whitesnake tickets, and I was able to go and see the show and go backstage and meet him, and well, I met him already, but meet up with him and meet Red Beach. Obviously, you guys know I'm a big Red Beach fan, so just want to take the opportunity to thank Joel for that. That was awesome. It was definitely a great moment for me. And then, just very special, not to outshine Joel, but I got a call from Dave Friedman to an email from Dave Friedman to let Billy Duffy from the Cult borrow my amp, and I'm just a huge Cult fan. I mean, ever since I was a kid. I mean, there's something very special about that band, and I know there's a bunch of you guys out there who share that love of that band. There's something so unique about the Cult, and there's so many different eras and everything. So that being said, of course I said yes. So basically, Billy Duffy used my amp for 2 shows in New York, and I told the tour manager, whoever it was, I'm like, do you think he'll sign it? And he's like, absolutely. So, of course, look, listen, I'm nervous meeting these guys. I mean, you grow up being huge fans of these people, and you finally meet them, and I'm still a kid that way, right? And I think that's part of who I am, is that it'll always be amazing to me. So that being said, I met Billy, and I was a little nervous to talk to him, and I just, asked him how the amp was and how it did during the show. He's like, oh, it was great, thanks so much, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh, you want me to sign the amp? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, okay, let's go downstairs. So we went to the stage, and he was joking around with me about, where he should sign it. And I'm like, sign it right in the front. And he's like, are you sure? He's like, it's kind of like a tattoo. Like, once you do this, you can't turn back. And I'm like, no, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. So, so Billy signed it and he put the date of the show here. And what's kind of cool is that he used HBE, but he put the gain on like, where is it? The gain on like 2. And he had it blended, he has it blended with a Roland Jazz Chorus, which is interesting. And I think he has like a Boss pedal board. I don't really actually know where he's getting most of his gain from. But he loved the sound of the amp, apparently. I think he's, well, I'm going to leave it at that. So there's nothing special about this amp. Nothing special about this amp other than it's a stock BE100, but it's got a lot of mojo in it, got a lot of rock and roll going through it. And I was going to get it updated to the latest spec, but now I'm kind of just like, I don't know if I should mess with it. All right, so on to the Sir stuff. So the PT100, this is a very special amp to me as well. This is number 6. This was actually in the shipping video that Sir put out. And I met Pete at the clinic and I actually played at the clinic, and it was awful. I was awful, but I was so excited and I didn't care. And like, you know, obviously I'm a big fan of Pete Thorne, and he's been such an unbelievable resource for everyone out there. And obviously he's becoming enormously successful and really deserves everything that he has achieved. Just a great guy, obviously. So, you know, this has got the famous, Sir Clean channel. And the voicing is really interesting because I was expecting a vintagey SL68 type of stuff, but actually it's a very sharp kind of modern version of that. So I use this example, it's kind of like that scene in Transformers 1 with like where Bumblebee turns into like, he goes from like this old Camaro, beat up Camaro, to this like, awesome modern Camaro. It's kind of like that. I mean, it's not saggy like a SL68. It's a little bit different. Even if you mess with the feedback control, it still stays in the modern world. What's funny about me is that I tend to not use channel switching amps because I don't gig or anything, and I end up just using one channel amps, and I don't really need all the bells and whistles. So I actually don't play this amp as much as other amps, just because I have so many. I have the SL68, I have some other amps that sound kind of close, but it's a very unique amp. It has a ton of articulation and note separation, and the only thing I'll say about this amp is that, and I found this to be the same thing with the OD100 amps, is that they're a little harder to play. I mean, they've taken huge leaps to make this amp much easier to play than the other one, and the MOSFET boost in it is definitely awesome. It just takes a little bit of calibration. Like, you just gotta, if you're gonna play this amp, like, you just gotta adjust to it. Like, it takes a sharper attack and you have to play cleaner, and it's not compressed. And listen, that's part of why it sounds so good, right? There's a little bit of trade-off, like the more compressed and squishy it gets, the less sonically good it sounds. So, it's one of those things, like, a lot of people come over and they think this is the best sounding amp I have, so it's, as I said before, like, it's a personal thing, right? It's what happens when your fingers, when the rubber hits the road and you try to play through something. What is that connection? And it's going to be unique for every single person. I mean, I have a friend on the forum, Joe D. He plays through this amp and his fingers fly off the rails. I mean, so it's a personal thing. That's why my opinion, although I appreciate that some people care, is really not the end all be all. I mean, you got to play these things yourself. Okay, so that being said, my blackout. So this is actually the SE100 blackout is actually, it's just an SE100. It's just cosmetically black. So there's nothing different from it from a standard SE100, which I wasn't even aware of. So this is basically a hand-wired, unbelievable sounding, basically modded Plexi. And I kind of, with the Sir stuff, with these 100 watt heads, these single channel heads, they're kind of like muscle cars to me, like, you got to drive them, you can't drive them all the time, and you can't, there's only so many times you can take it down the straightaway and push the speed limit. But when you do, it's an amazing experience. So, like, that's kind of the way I look at it. And I'm going to digress a little bit because the Sir Reactive Load really makes it possible to enjoy these amps in a way that you couldn't before, right? So this is just John's hand-wired SE100 crunch channel, and it's a pretty spectacular channel. It really reminds me of like the Van Halen chimey, I don't know, like Van Halen 3, like From Afar, that kind of like chimey, I don't know what that tone is, but it's just so cool. I don't know what he used on that, but it reminds me of that. So this amp's very interesting. So I've been kind of elusive about this amp. Is that a word? Yeah, I think. I've kind of never really spoken about this amp with a lot of transparency. But basically, I don't think it matters at this point. This amp was basically a clone of Doug Aldrich's JMP, I believe. It came to my attention, and I bought it. And it's not an SC100. It's basically, I guess, what would have been a Doug Aldrich 100. And I'm pretty sure John Surrey knows I have it. I was a little quiet about it in the beginning, but they're not apparently they're not making these amps. Even if they did a signature amp, apparently it would be different. But John knows I have it. He knows it's very special to me, I think he knows. And I would, full respect, I would never let anyone even look at this amp inside it. It's obviously a unicorn that I'm very glad to have, and I take very good care of it. And if I ever sell it, it's going back to the original seller. So that's a story. So in terms of like what an Aldrich amp sounds like, I mean, the reality is that this is just an awesome hard rock crunch tone, similar to the SC100, but it definitely has its own EQ curve. And once again, this is one of those amps that needs to be fully opened up. But now that I have the Surrey Active Load, I can enjoy it in ways I couldn't before. I think I was pushing the power section too hard here. I'd probably play it over here. So single channel, one of the best rock tones ever. But not what people would expect. I think people would expect more of the Cameron stuff. And thinking more about Whitesnake 87 and that kind of Whitesnake with like more of the saturation. It's not really a saturated amp in that sense. Just a really crystal clear, unbelievably hi-fi, high-def sounding amp. Very special amp. So the SL68 is interesting because everyone who knows me thought that this amp would be gone. And the irony of that situation is that I can't believe how much I love this amp. I mean, it's just the purity of it and just what happens when your fingers, when your guitar and pickups, connect with it, because it's so pristine and so awesome sounding. And it, obviously, when you put pedals in front of it, it's even better. But to be honest, like just playing rhythm with it, it's just so clear that it's just so inspiring. So I really, really love this amp. It's got the Variac built into it, so I usually run in the Variac mode. And once again, with the Surrey Active Load, I've had this thing dimed into the computer or my torpedo cab. I've used it through the Friedman flat response monitor. I've reamped it through a power amp. I mean, basically, there's so many ways that these amps can be used now. I mean, fry at power station, it's endless. The torpedo stuff, I mean, it's amazing that you could really, really enjoy this amp to the fullest extent with all the technology that's been provided. So I love this amp. I heard they lowered the prices on them, so it's kind of a no-brainer now. So the Helios. So it's interesting. I did a video of the Helios, and it got like a lot of reviews, but half the people disliked the video. So I don't really know what I said wrong in that video, or maybe I wasn't clear, but I love this amp. This amp is awesome. This is one of the best Marshall clone, whatever you want to call it, modded Marshalls ever. I mean, it's just fantastic. It sounds like it should. And it's just, and the real proof of that is that every time I play it, something musical comes out, right? Every time I play it, I can't stop playing it. And that's really special, right? Because there's a lot of amps that I play and I don't connect with, and I just, for whatever reason, and like this is such a great amp. I think the one complaint has been this amp is that it doesn't really work as like a true channel amp, because the clean channel gets too hot when you use the hot input and stuff like that. But once again, I don't gig, so these things don't have any real impact on me personally. But I love this amp. 80s mode is just perfect for 80s metal. I just love it. Once again, feels great on the fingers. Has a low wattage mode, like a 30 watt kind of Variac-ish thing going on too. So, once again, you're getting into a little bit of redundancy here, but all these amps are awesome. So the Ecstasy, so I had a little bit of like a Toto bender for a bit, but once again, there's just an iconic amp, feels amazing under the fingers, just really just an addicting amp to play. I definitely need to put it back into rotation soon. The Mr. Coliseum 300, I found this amp at Guitar Center. I walked in to get a pair of strings. Of course, you guys know how this always goes. And the manager was like, "Oh, I have something for you. You want to check it out?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, what's that?" You know, so he shows me this thing. I'm like, "Oh my God, it's mint. It's got like the pedals. It's got the manual. It's got like, it literally is like I walked in I don't know, 1987 and bought this thing. It's 1985, whatever was the thing that was built." So he was like, I was like, I'm like, "I'll take it." And he's like, "Well, do you want me to plug it in? Do you want to try it?" I'm like, "No, no." I'm like, "Take it off the floor. Here's my credit card." I, like, lock it in immediately. Safe to say I got it for a very good price, and I think they didn't know what they were, you know, sitting on. But basically, obviously this amp's impractically loud, but I think in terms of iconic amps, I felt like I had a Noah's Ark moment where I just had to kind of get it. So the Peavey 5150. So I was reading Joe Satriani memoir, and every single album he's like, "I used the 5150, 5150, 5150," and he literally lists all the gear that he used on every album. I think after Flying on a Blue Dream, he basically used it for almost every single album. And I was thinking about it, like Steve Stevens used this when he did the Vince Neil tour. And like, you know, I've been trying to like find that kind of elusive, you know, Vince Neil exposed tone. I was like thinking to myself, I'm like, everyone used this amp. Like I know I'm like, you know, you get to this snobby boutique place where you just can't imagine this amp being good because it's so cheap now and it's so common. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to get one. And I got one and I'm like, yep, that's it. I'm like, that's it. I mean, it's awesome. I mean, if you wrap this in boutique, you know, dress and you sold it for whatever, like everyone would be like, "Oh my God, it's amazing." I mean, this is, I get plenty of amps. I buy plenty of amps that aren't that, you know, boutique-ish and whatever, and they do suck, you know, and it's true. But this one is awesome. I mean, if you can't enjoy playing guitar through this amp, there's something wrong with you as far as I'm concerned. I don't want to insult anyone, but it's just an awesome amp. I mean, I don't know how anyone wouldn't like this amp. And yes, it's 120 watts, but I put it through the reactive load, and I did not blow my load. I did not blow my load. It's fine. I didn't blow the amp either, but I love this amp, and like I'm gonna like use it with the H9 and do all the pitch shifting and all that stuff. So it makes me really happy, and I got it for like $700 or something. Okay, this is my amp heat switcher, which I use when I have like guests over. It just makes the whole workflow a lot quicker, you know, with like you say, "Hey, you know, what are the first 4 amps you want to try out?" And you put it through the amp heat. I don't use it on a daily basis because I usually just recording with one amp. This is my awesome Devastator. Look how awesome that is. Seriously, I had to get Devastator. Okay, this is my EVH Stealth. People always ask me about these red emblems. My very, very good friend got them for me, and he said, "I can't get any more. They're just for you. It's a favor for you. I want you to have these things, and you can't ask for more," and da-da-da. And I was like, "Dude, you are awesome." And I really appreciate it. So this is a stock Stealth, except it's got the red emblem. So the thing with the Stealth, as I said before in a previous video, I really think the 5150 is a better amp. I mean, obviously this is more gain, but this is the problem with some of these non-boutique amps. And what's really frustrating to me is that I can't believe that Eddie Van Halen actually uses this amp when he can play an amp that feels as good as that. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So my issue with this is like, it would be an amazing amp if Dave Friedman modded it. You know, like if it had that, if it rolled back, it had sparkle, if it had, it's just very sterile and very stiff, and it sounds huge. Obviously through his rig and with his fingers, it sounds huge, but clearly it could be better. I keep it around because you gotta have a cool 5150 once in a while, but I don't really play it that much. I mean, with the stuff that I have, I mean, it's just not up to that level. But, you know, if you just always want to be on 10, you know, or 11, and you want this full bore, huge tone, I mean, it's great. It just has no dynamics to it. You know, so at least that's my experience. And I think a lot of people have agreed, because a lot of people who are selling it for that reason. And then again, we're just down to the, actually not down to the end yet. My AFD 100, I love this amp. It's a one-trick pony, but it's an awesome trick, and I think it's awesome. I just love it. I've never gotten the Jubilee mode to sound good, but I only use the AFD mode. What else? So the only other amp that I've left out is the Phil X amp. I played this amp 2 years ago at NAMM, and I was like, "Oh man, that amp is so awesome." And I just kind of like never pulled the trigger. And then I went back to NAMM, And I played it again. I'm like, oh my God, it really is as good as I remember it is. And then I was like, okay, I gotta have to have one. So I actually ordered this, and I'm getting a Friedman 412 soon too. So this amp does sound different than the BE. I mean, obviously the more gain you give it, the less, you know, that gap narrows a little bit, but there's something more martially to me with this amp. And you guys know I've always said that the B is a little too polite for me and stuff like that, and I've never been shy about that. This amp's awesome. It's just a perfect rock machine. Like, you hit an A chord and it blooms and it's right and it's just perfect, and it's a joy to play. Very similar to how I feel a lot about my SL68 and my Helios. It's just, they feel good, they sound awesome. And what's cool about this is it's got a 3-way gain clipping thing, I guess. I don't know if it's actually clipping, but it's a gain cut. And you don't have to change your settings, you just change the gain. So if you want to do like want to do a rhythm track with a little less, you can do a little less, a little even more less. And then right here is like the highest gain, which would be someplace in between BE and HBE. So basically it's like BE never had enough, HBE almost had too much. This is just perfect. So I know everyone's always trying to justify, like, oh, it's expensive amp for what it is and blah blah blah, but if it's that good, like if the tone's that good and it's the last amp you ever need, it's probably worth it. And now that I have it, I can say that. Like, you guys know I don't bullshit you. Like, if I felt like this was not worth it, I would tell you. I love this amp. Just remember, it's not a super high gain amp, but it's got enough clean sustain that you don't even need pedals for it. Obviously you have to, we all have to work on our playing, right? But you don't need it. Like, you could just boost it if you had to, but I mean, it's just so fantastic. And it's got a like a low voltage switch too. It gets saggy, kind of like Van Halen stuff. So once again, it's simple. It sounds amazing. You can't get a bad tone out of it. One of the best feeling amps under the fingers that I've ever played. Just an absolute inspiration to play. I love it. It's in the recording bay. I've been fighting like the flu for like a week. I'm getting my strength back now, so I just can't do anything for long times. I get very tired. So it's in the recording bag, which is a complete mess. Everyone's gonna make fun of my cable management or lack thereof. And really, I just can't end this conversation without talking about the reactive load. So, and I get this question all the time: what's better? What's the best load box? And I can't answer this question anymore. Like, this thing is fantastic. It sounds amazing. It retains every nuance of my amps, every piece of personality. And I'm using, like, actually kind of used a torpedo cab with it, because I either route that through my computer or I actually route it into a Friedman monitor. So I have the best of both worlds. And what's cool about this is I had a buddy over the other day, and we were trying out the Phil X amp, and I was able to digitally change it from a greenbackish speaker to a V30, but just by switching a knob on the cab. So I love it. I mean, honestly, I don't really use speaker cabs that much anymore, but because it's just such an awesome solution, and I actually run all the effects after the reactive load. They're not even in the loop, so that's kind of cool. So that's it. I think the only other amp on the way in the future is the Mesa Boogie JP2C. I don't envision any more amps other than maybe the Butter Slacks, maybe the Citizen Gain, maybe a Kraken, maybe. Okay, I'm gonna shut up now. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed it all. I appreciate all the cool comments and everything. This is not my profession. This is just a hobby, I hope you guys enjoy everything I've been doing, and that you find it helpful. All right, talk to you online.